Today, my guest is Adina Edelman. She's a professional editor from Baltimore, Maryland, USA. She has worked on over 100 books. She works with fiction authors, but also non-fiction authors who want to write a memoir. And in this conversation, we'll be talking about editing. What is an editor? Who is an editor? What do they do? How can you choose the best editor for your project? What could you do if you can't afford an editor? What about ChatGPT? Is that a good editor? Can we use that? I hope you will enjoy it. I hope you will find it useful. Get ready now. It's story time. I haven't said that in a long time. I usually say this in interviews. So get ready now. It's story time. So Adina, you're an editor. You're a professional editor. And the first question that I have is this. What exactly do you do?
I turn a messy manuscript into the book that you end up getting from the bookstore and opening it up and seeing that it's actually clear and easy to read and it's engaging. I don't just work on typos and punctuation stuff and grammar. It's a lot more than that. It does depend on the stage of editing, but there's also content related issues that I look at. There is dialogue, there is theme and plot. There is overall book structure. There's a lot of different areas to make sure that when you actually have the book in your hands, it's going to be the best read possible.
Okay, so you work on not just the language, but also the overall story.
Yes.
Okay, and so you must be an expert in storytelling, I guess.
I wouldn't say that. I think that there are a lot of other people who have entrenched themselves a lot more in storytelling and understand the mechanics of storytelling a lot more than I do. I think I'm simply in a place where I grew up my entire childhood reading, and that certainly gives you an idea of what makes a good story. And I've definitely learned a lot on my own by college helps, but really it's reading the craft books, it's reading really good books, it's by practicing your writing and coming to a place where you can pinpoint what the story needs to be better, what is working and how to capitalize on that. And it's just, acknowledging the strengths and weaknesses of a book, and then also seeing what are my strengths and weaknesses that I bring to the table as a book editor that I can help this author with.
So you mentioned college. Did you... Because I have this idea that editors are, they have a degree in, I don't know, in what? Like storytelling, English, creative writing. How does one become an editor? Like, is there a degree that one can take in editing?
It's a good question, and there isn't actually like an actual degree out there of like, if you want to become a book editor, take this degree. There are English degrees, which is what I got. There are publishing degrees, I believe. I never like looked into that route specifically, but a lot of editors who go, let's say, into the Big Five and try to get a job at the Big Five publishers. So they will, they'll still have a variety of degrees, but they'll try to get some of those publishing related degrees or courses or classes taken. But there really isn't, as far as I know, there isn't a degree out there that simply focuses on editing material, which is kind of sad because it would be helpful.
Yeah.
It would be helpful for us who need to just learn on the job because we don't really learn the skills so much in school.
Okay. So how did you learn? Like, you read a lot of great books, you said. College helped. But then, like, do you think there was something in particular that helped you learn the art of editing?
Yeah, I think there were two things. I was coming in already with an inclination of here's how to write a good sentence and here's, grammar basics. So I did already have that. And I think every editor going into this space has that. So what really helped me grow it and develop it, so one was an editing internship I did at the Baltimore Review, which is a local literary newspaper, magazine rather. And I interned there for one summer, and then I stayed on as a volunteer for several years. but I did proofreading for them. They had a quarterly issue, and then they printed a yearly annual of all the work that they put out. A really, really fantastic literary journal. And that really helped me improve both the technical proofreading skills and then also a little bit in bigger terms of what makes a good story and what makes a publish-worthy story. And then the second thing was really when I jumped in and started learning on the job. I was working for a vanity press. And for those who don't know, that's a type of publishing service where you can bring your manuscript to them and they will publish it for you, and they'll sort of take any and all books. So there isn't any filtration process. And so, it's, people don't really look at vanity presses as a highly regarded thing because there isn't any quality checking. And the editing might not necessarily be, you might be just slapping a proofread on a book. But it still gave me a lot of experience because they would give me a book and I had to quickly learn, the Chicago Manual of Style, which is this massive thing. So at the time I was using the 17th edition, and I had to sort of take a crash course in looking up all of these style decisions and going through the entire comma section and all that kind of stuff. And that was a very huge learning on the job and developing the skills for what I needed to look up, what I already knew, what I had absolutely no idea about.
Okay. Wow. So volunteering, basically, like working, like doing the thing. Like,
yeah.
Okay. Let's say that a writer or an aspiring author is writing a book, and they want to choose. They need an editor. First of all, do every writer, every aspiring author need an editor? Like, is it a requirement? If you're publishing, I'm thinking, if you're publishing through a publisher, I think they give you an editor.
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah, a traditional publisher will give you an editor.
Okay. But what if I want to self-publish? Like, do I need one?
It's a really good question. So here's the thing with the word need and looking at it as necessity. If you want to be putting out the highest quality book possible and the best book possible, then yes, you need an editor, because they're going to find things that you don't see. They're going to make sure that it is clean and consistent and all that stuff. And we've been trained for this, and we know the things to look for. For those who, and this is unfortunately the case for a lot of people, either they don't have the budget for such a thing, or they simply just want to get something out there either for their family or for themselves, then they might not necessarily need a book editor. That's not really, it doesn't fit into their why they're bringing this book into the world. So that's why the question is a little bit tricky. But I will say that if you want your book to be the best it can possibly be and really make sure that it speaks to your readers and is engaging as possible, you need an editor.
Okay. And I have a question here from one of my YouTube subscribers. And it's this: if you can't afford a professional editor, what's the next best thing before self-publishing? Grammarly, ChatGPT to polish and edit your final draft? What is the best way to help yourself on a budget?
That's a good question. The best way to help yourself on a budget. Well, first of all, just to clarify, with self-publishing, there are still, when you self-publish, hopefully if you can afford it and can save up for it, you still want to hire an editor when you're self-publishing. Just putting that out there. For those who, when they're self-publishing, they still can't fit that into their budget for whatever reason, there are, for example, I have an editing friend, Jeanette Smith, who put out a self-editing course. So that is like a very cheap alternative for something of training yourself. Oh, this is how I can go through my book. Will it be as good as a professional editor doing it? No. But it will certainly be way better than not doing anything at all. And I would also say that for those who are looking to hire an editor and those who are not looking to hire an editor, putting aside your work for a good few months and not looking at it, and then coming back to it will be a huge step in improving your book, because you'll be able to see all the typos and all the plot holes and all the other stuff that you need to work on. So that is also just like a huge tip to capitalize on.
Yeah.
But, in terms of Grammarly or other AI, I personally tend to reject 70 to 90% of Grammarly suggestions, to the point
Hmm.
where I've stopped using it.
Hmm.
It can be tremendously helpful, especially for people who really struggle with grammar and proper sentence structure and that kind of thing. I think it can be very useful. I think it's important to recognize that it is simply a tool to aid you, and it in no way can correct stylistic or voiced, style and tone type of decisions. It will often give you incorrect suggestions, especially when it comes to dialogue. And it's not perfect. It's a tool. So can definitely be used. It just shouldn't be relied upon. And yeah, that's what I have to say about those AI type of checkers.
Yeah. AI. So you're saying that it's not reliable, at least Grammarly. What about ChatGPT? Because sometimes, not sometimes, I often use ChatGPT in my writing, not to generate text, but to help me edit my text. For example, a typical question could be, do I need this preposition here? Or which is the correct preposition in this sentence? Or should I cut this comma here, or do I need it? Things like that. But so what do you think of this use of ChatGPT or AI in general, any other chatbot?
So I think, again, if we look at it as a tool as opposed
Hmm.
to a writing companion,
Yeah.
then that changes the picture a little bit. So what you're describing of, here's a sentence and I need, tell me if the preposition is in the right place or if I need to use a different preposition, then I think that is helpful if you are familiar enough with prepositions and with writing that you can recognize, does the sentence that it spits back at me, does it make sense? Is it actually an improvement? You just need to have that sort of background knowledge for it, because there are times when it will give suggestions that not only don't make sense, it makes it worse off.
Mm.
But I can't say that I've practiced with it enough or like used it enough to be able to really talk about it. But I would just say, like, if for people who are looking to give ChatGPT a whole paragraph of text and say, can you rewrite this and make it sound better? I would just be hesitant about that, because
Yeah.
ChatGPT is pulling from other writing styles. It's not going to necessarily make it your voice in your writing style.
Yeah.
So, it's not necessarily a great route.
Yeah. We're talking about voice, and I'm taking an editing course right now, and one of the major highlights, one of the major takeaways, is this: editors don't leave fingerprints. I think it was the quote there.
Mm-hmm.
They polish everything. They improve the text in a way that is as similar to the original as possible,
Mm-hmm.
only better. So you leave no fingerprints. And I realized that ChatGPT, like, it leaves a lot of fingerprints. Like, it changes your voice. It gives you suggestions that you words or phrases that you would never use yourself. So the job of an editor, a great editor, this is what I've learned, leaves no fingerprints. Do you agree with this, or
Yeah.
not? I mean, you must agree, because it comes from an reputable editing course. So
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think this is something that more writers need to realize, because it's a
mm,
big fear before
mm,
hiring an editor is, are they
mm,
going to change my voice? Are they going to change my writing? And it's really important to realize that a really good editor will not do this. And that's why you can ask them for a sample edit and you can see, in their when they edit my work, are they changing my style and my preferences, or are they simply enhancing and improving what's there? I once had a client ask me, can you send me other examples of your work so that I could see your editing style. And I told her, if you could see my editing style on the books I've edited, then I'm doing a really bad job. Like I can show you my editing style on your work so you could see the way that I interact with you and the way that I leave my comments, and perhaps, the different, I don't know, just the different decisions that I make, and that will be my editing style. But you won't be able to see my editing style on another client's work. That would just be really sad. So yeah, my job, another way that I look at it is I'm here to be a writer's microphone. I'm just making their voice louder as opposed to, replacing their voice with a totally different singer.
Okay, can we define voice? Like, what is voice exactly?
It's one of the hardest things in writing to pinpoint. It's a very kind of evasive thing to talk about. I really only got a better idea of it when I was interning for the Baltimore Review, because we were reading, I must have been reading maybe like 20 to 30 or 40 submissions a day. And so you get a really quick idea of what has voice, what is completely lacking it, and what is sort of like, almost there. Because sometimes you'll read a piece and you're like, wow, this is full of voice. So what does that mean, that something is full of voice? It comes across in word choice. It comes across in the tone of a sentence. Like, for example, is a character using sarcasm? Is an entire story being given over in a sarcastic light? It's a sort of satire. So that is a voice and a style and a tone that's being used. It's punctuation really plays a huge role in a writer's voice. There's a whole thing right now about M dashes, of does the M dash indicate that you're using AI, which is completely inane. But there are some writers who really like to use M dashes, and that is their voice and their style. And some really don't like it and they prefer semicolons. So there's, there are so many things that make up a writer's voice. And again, it's hard to pinpoint like what creates it, but it's just, like when you're listening to someone and you hear their voice, how do you describe their voice? We can use terms like, low, deep, gravelly, that, but there's really quite limited words to use to describe how a person speaks to another person. So that's kind of similar with the writing voice.
And how do you make sure you don't change the author's voice? Because, okay, I've been an English teacher, English as a second language teacher for 10 years, and I've seen a lot of writing assignments, writing like essays and texts, and, an English teacher needs to point out the mistake so the student can correct it. And I must have changed the voice of the author 1,000 times. So this makes me wonder, will I be a good editor because I've been an English teacher? Will I be a good editor, or will I be the kind of editor who changes everything? So I guess my question is, how do you make sure you don't change the voice of the author? Maybe you find a sentence that you don't like, or you've seen this word that you wouldn't use, or you'd rather use another word in that sentence. Would you change it? So what's the process like?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I've realized over time that the authors that I want to have that urge to change their voice are the ones who don't really have it to begin with. They don't really have it fully developed yet, or their writing is on the weaker side. So, for example, students who tend to still be trying to find their voice and just simply write well, you would very likely find this. So, you come across a sentence that is very badly written, for example. So I'll look at it and I'll go, well, I could rewrite this very easily. I could put my voice into the sentence and it would be great. It would be a great sentence. But I have to see, am I doing this simply because I think my way is better, and so let me just make my job easier and put that sentence in? Or should I leave it as a comment and say, have you considered this type of sentence structure, and leave it as an example, and then tell them, take this idea and put it into your own words. And usually I go with that second option because I'm aware at this point of when I'm feeling the need to slip in like my writing inclination into my editing as opposed to being a good editor. But for those writers who have really well developed voices and a well developed writing style, it's much more difficult. It would be much more difficult for me to like override their writing style because like it's so clearly there. So anything that I do is just so clearly enhancing what they already have. For someone who is still figuring it out and still working on their writing and certainly the writing basics, then it's much more, easier for me to insert my own style. And that's where I sort of have to be very aware of myself and instead leave it as a comment or instead make a minimum change. And another tip that I like to give to writers who are struggling with that balance, to editors who are struggling with that balance, is make sure that you're making time to write. Especially if you are actually, a writer, make sure that you're making time to do some personal writing or any creative writing. And that sort of gets it out of your system so that when you come back to the editing project, you don't have as much of a need to fiddle.
Do you write yourself?
I do.
What type of writing do you do?
Mostly fiction. Some poetry, although I haven't really worked on that in a very long time, unfortunately. But yeah, different forms of fiction.
Okay. And I have two questions here. Maybe let me ask you the first question that came to me. What advice do you have for writers or aspiring authors who need to choose an editor? Like they want to hire an editor. Where do they go? How do they choose? How do they make sure they're hiring the best possible editor for their project?
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of places to look, which makes this more difficult because if there were only one place, then it would be easier to sort of find your person. Because, there's just for two places, you have Reedsy and you have LinkedIn. So Reedsy is a platform for all different types of publishing professionals, and authors can go on there and do a search. And then there's LinkedIn, where there's also a lot of different publishing professionals offering services. So the first step is to know your genre, because your genre will help you know which editor to pick, because not every editor works on all genres. I only work on memoir and certain genres of fiction. And there are other editors who only do nonfiction business books or nonfiction self-help books. So knowing your genre can really help you with narrowing down that search. And then the next step is, once you've sort of picked out, let's say, a list of 10 editors who look reputable, and you've checked out, do they actually have the professional experience that I'm looking for? Do they have experience, and do they have testimonials and that kind of thing? Just reach out to them, and you could say, I have this word count of a book. I'm looking to get it edited by this time. And you'll see if they're actually available, because sometimes they're not. And if they are available, you can ask them for a sample edit. And that is always my first step of the process. It's a really, really important step for the author to see my editing style on their work. And for me to see, do I actually enjoy this writing? Is it something that I would actually want to edit? And if so, how much would that cost? What would the timeline look like? And that kind of stuff. So always ask for a sample edit. If the editor does not offer you a sample edit, you can ask for it. If they don't agree to do a sample edit, I would say do not go with that editor. Most editors will be very happily do a sample edit for you, paid or free. I charge because there's a lot of value that's given over in a sample edit.
Yeah.
But that is really like such a great way to see, is this going to be a good editing author relationship?
And a sample edit is like, how many words or pages do you edit?
Yeah, so different editors will have different parameters. I ask for 20 to 30 pages. I do a line edit of the first 5 pages, and then I'll do comments up to maybe like up to 20 pages. If it's a more developmental edit type of sample edit, then that's why I want more pages, and that's why I'll keep looking through the rest. But that tends to be enough for me to figure out what editing level is needed.
Okay, can we talk about the different types of editing?
Hmm.
Like, because you're mentioning line edit, before you mentioned proofreading. Is that editing? Um, and developmental editing. So, can you teach us a little bit about
Yeah, for
this?
sure. Yeah, I usually use an analogy to describe it of you're
Mm,
standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, and this is the big picture edit where you can see the entire, or at least of what your eye can see, the entire canyon spread out before you is the big picture view, the bird's eye view of this canyon. It's massive. You're able to just see most of it in its entirety. And that's where in the developmental edit, we're looking at this book in its entirety. We're looking at the structure of it. We're making sure that it flows, that all of these story plot points are there, that there's character arc and theme and all the just important foundational story elements.
mm,
And then there's line editing where you're sort of going into the canyon and you're sort of, starting the trek through it. And it's a much more focused sentence level edit. The difference between line editing and copy editing, there are people who separate it, there are people who put it together. The basic
mm,
difference is that line editing is very stylistic, and the sound of a sentence and the flow and how it, more of the writing, just more of the writing style and the music of the sentence. And then copy editing is very more just nitty gritty grammar, punctuation, style, that style consistency. So just you're looking at things like commas and capitalization and numbers and that kind of thing. So there's a very artistic side and there's a very technical side. And again, some people put it together because one tends to inform the other. How you're
mm.
going to fix the grammar, and how you want to change the sentence structure will be what punctuation you choose and stuff like that. But that's a walking in the canyon. It's a very detailed focus. And then proofreading, which many writers feel is a copy edit, but it's not. Proofreading is the very last stage. It's when the manuscript is already clean. So most of the sentences that you're looking at do not need to be touched at all. It's the very last step, and you're really just making sure, is everything clean? Are there any leftover typos? Was anything missed or overlooked? And that at that point you're sort of just like sitting by the river in the canyon and just you're it's a very detailed level, but it is it's not as you're not doing as much as a line edit or as a developmental edit. So those are the main ones.
Right. So I guess that a writer needs to choose. Like, do I need a developmental editor or a proofreader? Like, you could even hire different editors at different
Mm-hmm.
stages of the process,
Yeah.
right? Is
Yeah,
this
and
what?
you
Mm,
like I will not perform developmental through proofreading on one manuscript, because by the time, let's say I did developmental and line editing, by the time it's ready for a proofread, my eyes are just passing over all of the words, and I'm not going to be catching any mistakes. You want fresh eyes for, one out of three of the forms of editing, or four. So that's definitely an important point. Not most authors who come to me do not know what editing is needed. And that's very
mm.
common. It's hard to know what my book needs. And that's what the sample edit does. It helps you see what is actually needed.
Okay. Okay. Um, how many clients have you got? Like, do you need to have a lot of clients to thrive as an editor? Or because I imagine one project will take you a good amount of a good amount of time.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah. One project will typically take, it really depends. Like from a publisher, it could be like a month and done. Or it
mm,
could be, 6 months and done. It depends on many different factors. A private client could be anywhere from 4 months to a year if they take a
wow.
really long time doing revisions, which has happened. But standard, I think, more is like 4 to 5 months is the
Okay.
editing process. Yeah.
Okay. And this is the other question: do editors need editors? I mean, you're a writer as well. And
Mhm.
in one of your webinars, you said that you chose not to write. You don't want writing as your career. You prefer editing as your career.
Mhm.
And I wonder why. Like because you want it to be a hobby, or
Yeah, I have done a writing internship in the past in high school. It was the most pressurized and stressful thing I've ever
Hmm.
done. It forced me, for me, putting out words and forcing creativity is much harder than someone giving me their work and me saying, "Oh, okay, now we need to edit it and fix it up." And it's just a totally different process.
Hmm.
Um, so I didn't want to turn something that I loved into a pressurized, stressful thing that I had to make money with. So that was really why I just was like, I'm not gonna try this.
I feel the same way because I'm a freelance writer and they give me stuff to write,
Hmm.
and sometimes I'm like, I have no interest in writing this,
Hmm.
and it's a struggle. It's very hard. I've said this many times. It's very hard to write about what you're not interested in, and it's even harder to find a way to make it interesting.
Hmm.
Um, so maybe editing. Like I asked myself this question: is it better to write about what you're not interested in, or is it better to read about what you're not interested in? Because an editor must read something that maybe you're not interested in, unless you choose your clients very well. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
So, what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, I have worked on books in the past that I was not as interested in. They for sure
Mm.
took me longer to edit than the books I was interested in. To the point where now part of that sample edit process is I make sure am I actually interested in this. If
Oh.
I'm not, it will take me much longer to edit. I might not do as good of a job if I'm not as invested in it. And then it's not fair to the author because they deserve an
Mm.
editor who's very gung ho about their work and really is invested in it. So that's why I do think it's very important to like the book that you're editing. And that's why so many editors will be careful with their niches and with which genres they take on, and even what types of editing that they do. So, that's it's important.
Yeah. So stay away from editors who say I edit everything.
So
Maybe.
there are editors who do that because they actually are interested in a lot of things, or
Mm.
they're trying to get experience and they're
Okay.
willing to put in that work and that effort. So in the beginning I did work in a lot of different genres. um Again, I mean, at that point it would be curious if the level of editing that I was putting out on them was equal to a book that I enjoyed, because at that point everything sort of took me a long time and I was learning about everything. But certainly by this point, working on a like nonfiction business book for me right now would probably take longer, because I just wouldn't enjoy it as much. So
Mm.
for editors who say, "Oh, I work on anything and everything," I would be like a little bit cautious about it, especially because you might want an editor who does specialize in your genre and knows the genre conventions and knows a little bit more. But if you have an editor who with a lot of experience and they say, "I'm just genuinely like to work on so many different types of books because that keeps me interested and engaged," then that's valid.
Okay. Okay. Um, Going back to my original question, do editors need editors? So you're right. You write mostly fiction. You said.
Hmm.
Um, do you need an editor, or can you self-edit?
Um, so it depends what I'm doing with my writing.
Hmm.
Like for the novels that I'm writing, I will 100% need an editor. That is, 100% for sure, for sure.
Hmm.
If it's, and I haven't done this in a very long time, but let's say like several years ago when I was writing flash fiction, or short stories and submitting it to literary journals. So by that point, like I don't think it really was even on my radar to like send it to another editor and be like, "Hey, can you look this over for me?" And I think also for such short stuff like that, um, at least for me, it was enough to simply self-edit it and then put it out and see if it got accepted or not. So I guess for that small stuff, for the literary journal type stuff, I would only think like, oh, do I need an editor if, let's say it's like I need to pay to submit this and there's like a cash prize if it actually gets accepted type of thing, and I want to make sure it's really good, then yeah, I would probably send it to another editor to get it looked over. But if it's a sort of just, putting it out there and it's a sort of like a side hobby type of thing, I wouldn't necessarily do that. But for novels, 100% need editor.
Yeah, because there are things, as you said before, there are things that the writer can't see, and I realize this when I write something and I look at it the next day, and I'm like, whoa, why did I write this? Like this makes no sense, or it's so cheesy, or whatever. And before you said, uh, leave your work there for, what did you say, 6 months, like for a few
Um,
months.
the longer the work is, the longer you want to stay away from it. So from like a novel size or like a manuscript size work, then at least 2 months. Looking to
Okay.
more 4 months, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm in the business of encouraging people to write tiny books, so maybe they don't need that long. Yeah, what do you
Maybe.
think of this? Like this idea of publishing a tiny book just to start, because most people, I mean, I am one of those. I was one of those. I believe that I could never become an author. Like a book to me was like this massive creative project that I would never be able to get done. Like a book is something like this, at least that thick. But then I wrote my tiny book, which is like 12,000 words. It's not a lot, and I realized, whoa, I wrote one. I'm not the next Stephen King, of course, but I published a tiny book, and people can do the same. Like
Yeah.
you can start that way. Do you think there's a market for tiny books? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. It also has the advantage of being quick and easy to read. And so for people who don't have a lot of time, or,
Hmm.
let's say they have one day and they want to spend an hour reading, and then it's like, oh, this is a
Hmm.
great thing to pick out and just be done and feel accomplished with it. On the writer's side, I think it's very valuable because, like you said, it's looked at as such a massive sort of mountain, and being able to prove to yourself, I can do it, and now maybe I can take it a step further and maybe write something a little bit longer, or just put out another one of the same size. I think that's very valuable. So it goes back to sort of your why of why you're doing it, and seeing, well, just doing this small step help me to come closer to what I want to be fulfilling and doing and giving to others.
Yeah, I'm thinking Hemingway started with. I don't know if he started with that, but he wrote many short stories, and a short story could be like the first step to before you write a novel. Like you
Mm,
write short stories first,
yeah.
and then you engage with that more like bigger project.
Yeah.
Okay. I have another question. Okay, a question from a viewer, one of my viewers. It's this. Did you study? Okay, but I guess we answered this. Did you study anything in particular to be an editor? Do you have a book? Okay, do you have a book about editing you would recommend for someone to learn the craft?
Mm. Do I have a book that I would
Except
recommend?
for the Chicago Manual stuff.
Which is like a little bit higher level.
Yeah.
Um, there are a few books I would actually recommend for someone who's like really actually hardcore interested in editing and taking that on. Amy Einsohn has the Copy Editor's Handbook, and that's really good for getting a better idea of the type of things that copy editors will look for when they're editing, and the things that we have to have in mind, and different just grammar stuff, knowledge. And she presents it very clearly, and so that's a great one. There's also two books, and I have them here. So one is from Richard Bradburn. It's self-editing for self-publishers.
Hmm.
Um, and that is really great for editors, and it's also really great for authors who, going back to that question of if you don't have a budget to hire an editor, books like these can actually be very helpful to read through it as you're going through your manuscript. And it's really a really great guide for the main problems and issues that come up in a manuscript and how to resolve them. And Louise Harnby also has a similar book called Editing Fiction at Sense Level, and that's also a really great one with a little bit more fiction focused. And yeah, there are books out there for both editors and authors who are looking to improve their editing that are not expensive.
Thank you. I'll put these in the show notes for sure. And I have a question about the difference between a book coach and an editor. Because I thought a book coach was an editor, but then I discovered, I mean, there are two different things, but I don't know the difference. Is there a difference?
There is a difference for sure. For example, I do not do book coaching. And book coaching tends to be where someone comes to the coach and says, I have this idea. Let's say it's with a business book, because that's pretty common. I have this idea for a business book. I want to talk about X concept, but I don't know how to actually write this book. So the book coach will help them create that outline, will walk them through that writing process, and help them overcome any blocks and help them with the structure and all that kind of stuff. And within however many weeks, they'll have that draft ready. At which point, hopefully they'll put it aside and then they'll self-edit and all that stuff, and then they'll be ready to come to an editor. So for me, let's say the earliest stage of editing is developmental editing, that big picture look to make sure the foundation is solid. So I will only start a developmental edit when there is a complete manuscript. So if an author comes to me and says, I'm halfway through writing my book, can we work together to help me finish it? I will send them to a book coach so that they can get it done. And then when it's actually done, then they can come back to me. But that's usually where the mark is, where the book coach helps them from idea up until the manuscript is actually done. And then I'll step in where the manuscript is ready to be edited and make sure it's all clean and stuff like that.
Okay, so they don't look at language, really. They don't work with language, book coaches.
They won't do like self-sentence level type stuff. And then there are writing coaches who are more specific for the actual how to write. So for example, a book coach who may be more focused on let's get the writing out and let's get this book done. A writing coach might say, let's work on how you're writing this chapter and how you're writing this scene and improve the writing itself. So there will be times where I'll do a sample edit and I'll see this isn't ready for editing. It's not there yet. And I'll send them either to a book coach or to a writing coach to help them either finish the manuscript or to help them improve their writing, because sometimes the writing needs help. So there's all these different types of people.
Like improve their writing, what do you mean exactly? Like to improve your writing? Because writing involves punctuation, grammar, vocabulary. Is there a particular focus, you mean? Or
so let's say you have a scene in a novel, and let's say that it is a conversation between two people, and the author does not yet know how to really write dialogue, and they don't yet really know how to create realistic characters. So you have a very flat, non-interesting, either maybe even dramatic, melodramatic scene. And I, as an editor, can look at that and I can say, there's only so much that I can edit before we have to just completely rewrite the scene. And if we're just totally rewriting the scene, and if the author doesn't know how to rewrite the scene better, because this is what they know, then they need someone to help them with that. And an editor usually does not provide such high level assistance in rewriting a scene. I can comment and say, this piece of dialogue needs, to be changed because of X, and maybe here's a suggestion, but that won't necessarily attack the problem of the writer not knowing how to write the scene. And for that, they might need a writing coach.
Okay. Well, I thought that developmental editing was part of the developmental editing involved this. So I help you rewrite the scene, but now you're saying that a writer would need a writing coach. So when you look at the
It
big,
depends. It depends on the level of writing. If the writing is good enough that the writer can take the feedback and apply it on their own, and it's not. It really depends on how badly the scene is written. If it's a complete mess and it's written horribly, then they need a writing coach. If it's like, oh, most of the mechanics here are working, but the dialogue is not great, then okay, then we'll work on the dialogue. For sure, developmental editing and line editing can address that. It's more if the scene is just not written well at all.
okay, what's some typical comments that you might make on a manuscript?
Please add an action beat so that we can picture these people talking. That is a very common one that I'll leave. Because we tend to, when many writers, when they write dialogue, it'll just be that back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So it ends up being just these voices floating on the page. And at a certain point, we lose track of these people, and either we don't know who's talking, or we can't picture them at all after a certain point. And if you can't picture them, then you've lost the scene. So even just adding a line like, Sarah smiled, just something so simple, then now if it's next to a line of dialogue, we know she said that line, and then you can picture her smiling, and that brings the scene back into focus.
Nice. Okay, and this is what type of editing?
That would probably be more line/copy editing. On a developmental edit, if it depends on the manuscript, but let's say for the most part dialogue is very good, but this is one thing dialogue related that the author needs to add as action beats, then either in the manuscript itself or in the editorial letter I'll mention this is something to be aware of, that we need a lot more action beats, and I would recommend you add them in before we go on to the next stage of editing, and that way it'll go faster and I'll be able to really comment on the things that they don't see as opposed to the things that they know about.
Okay. Do you also offer advice on where to publish your book if the author wants to self-publish, or legal advice even? For example, if I mention a name in my manuscript, or any type of legal advice and how to publish the book. Do you also offer that kind of service?
So where to publish, it's interesting because most of the authors who've come to me already sort of have that idea. Either they want to try querying to agents and try to go the traditional publishing route, or they sort of already have a hybrid publisher picked out, or they're just going to full on go self-publishing. But I do have a list of hybrid publishers I recommend, and that's really for authors who need help with the actual putting the book out and publishing in KDP and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of people who do help with that. So I have, a list of recommendations for people who need that. Or I have people in my network like book marketers and book designers and people like that if they need someone like that to send them to. In terms of legal advice, the one thing that comes up pretty frequently, or I would say the most frequently, is song lyrics. So authors will add song lyrics into their book for whatever reason. And I'll have to flag it and go, unless you get permission to reprint these song lyrics, you're going to have legal problems. And then that ensues usually a lot of work to try to get permission for said lyrics. But other forms of legal stuff, sometimes if it's a memoir, then I'll just double check, do you want to be using real names? And then they'll be like, oh no, I'm going to replace all the names and make sure that it's, all pseudonyms and stuff like that. But those tend to be the only really two legal stuff that pops up, is just, that kind of stuff.
All right. What if you don't know how to, there's a sentence that you don't know how to edit, or you feel that there's something wrong with the structure of the story or whatever, and you don't know how to fix it? Do you have like a network, other editors that can help you?
Yeah, so I'm part of an editing group, and every so often someone will post a line or, here's the situation that I'm in, what would you do? And that's really helpful. And, speaking of editors needing editors, that's really great because we're all still learning. I'm certainly still learning. I've only been doing this for like 4.5 years. So there's so much grammar stuff and so much other, client relationship type things that I need help with. So having that resource and having that support is really, really helpful to make sure that I'm providing the best editing service that I can.
What group is this?
We call
If
it
you
the
can
Edit
share.
Circle. Yeah, it's just a group of all these different types of editors. It's a private Discord group.
Oh, okay. Okay. Right. Is there anything that you hate about your job? Or dislike?
So
Not
yeah,
necessarily hate.
or dislike. Yeah, I dislike marketing. I did not go into editing thinking that I'd be running my own business, and that's basically what I'm doing. So that's not something that I would say I highly enjoy. With the editing itself, two things that drive me crazy are cumulative or coordinating adjectives, and that's where you have like the small
Ooh.
blue car and certain you have to know like are there commas there, are there not? That drives me crazy. Hyphens can sometimes drive me crazy. So there's there's grammar level stuff that editors also have trouble with.
Why did you choose freelancing rather than going on a like working for a publisher?
hmm Two reasons. One is it's very hard to get into an actual
Oh,
publisher and get work there.
oh.
And the second, really, and this is the main one, is because when I started out, I wanted to be working on Jewish fiction because I'm an Orthodox Jew. So I wanted to be reaching out to the Jewish publishers. And thankfully, I work with some of them now. But the way that their system works is that they have a list of freelancers that they pull from for a given project. So once I learned that and realized, oh, I really need to be freelancing in order to do this. But once I'm freelancing, I'm really running my own business. So then that sort of led into that sort of framework of how I'm running things now.
Okay, cool. Wow, I've learned so much from you, and you made me interested in discovering even more. How can I become an editor? This is like private coaching now. How can I become the best editor in the world? I
Uh,
work with, uh, I don't read fiction, okay? I read a lot of nonfiction, which is not just self-help, but also philosophy, history. I really like nonfiction, real stuff.
mhm.
Um, and I'm an
But
English teacher,
that,
which I don't know if it's an advantage or not.
it's an
Um,
advantage.
it's an
Also, the
advantage.
fact
That's
that
cool.
you work with writers whose second language is English is it's huge because there are so many people out there writing books who are in that position, and
Oh,
it's so helpful to have an editor with your background to be able to help them. So you're already like in a great spot for helping writers like that.
okay. I didn't know. Like, I thought that non-native English speakers would like their project is not to their main goal is not to publish a book, but like to learn English. But you're saying that there are English as a non-native English speakers who are
hmm
writing books.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, for sure.
okay, okay.
Yes. And for people who just want to get, just general editing experience, and I usually recommend to reach out to your local literary journal and see if they need another reader to help out with going through submissions, because that really is a huge help. For seeing what's published worthy, and then if they have any, if they have those quarterly issues, you could help proofread. It's a really great experience.
Okay, thank you. Adina, where can people find you and where can people can get in touch with you?
So I am active on LinkedIn. You can also reach out to me at my website, edelmanedits.com. And those are the two primary places where I'm most likely to be responsive.
Yeah, I forgot to ask you the question about gold, your
Oh,
what-
mining the message?
mining the message. You want to say a couple of words about that?
Sure. That really emerged from my experience with that Vanity Press, where I would have to slap a proofread on a book and sort of just focus on the typos and stuff like that. And for me, the way I edit and the way that I find editing most valuable is when I'm really unearthing the message that a writer is trying to share with their audience, and the story and the goal that they have and that their book really is. So I'm really not just trying to, smooth the topsoil over and make things look pretty. I'm really trying to make sure that the best of this book is really brought to the surface.
I can tell that you read a lot of fiction. That's cool. Thank you, Adina. Thank you so much. This was fun. Thanks for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're a writer and you want to improve your writing, or you want to keep improving your writing, consider joining my private email list, Better Writers. I send one short email every week. I share tips, insights, things that I learn, book recommendations to help you do one thing only: become a better writer. The link is in the show notes or in the description of this video. Thank you for listening once again. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.